to the domestic violence shelter and they handed me a chart that was the cycle of violence, I realized I had been abused for all these years, even though he never laid a finger on me. That's what By now, I encourage and I empower the boys women who has problems with issues of domestic violence to speak up. You are not alone. Raise your voice to end domestic violence.
My name is Mandy Gibson, and I'm the Director of Clinical Operations at Good Shepherd Shelter for Battered Women with Children. I'm also a proud alumni of the USC School of Social Work 2006, and an instructor at the virtual academic campus with the USC School of Social Work. So I'm up here today to introduce Sister Kelley, who is our Executive Director of Good Shepherd Shelter. The Sisters of the Good Shepherd are an international order of sisters serving in 72 countries with a 370-year history of working with women and children. Sister Ann started her career working with teenagers who were runaways from violent homes. She's worked in domestic violence since 1987, both in Chicago and here in Los Angeles. She was Executive Director of Good Shepherd Shelter in 1994 until 2010, and she's returned to her role as Executive Director in 2013. Good Shepherd Sisters are from 7 countries and have come to Good Shepherd Shelter in Los Angeles to learn how to operate shelters and address the issues of domestic violence in their countries. 2 sisters from Mexico came and were ready to open their shelter in Guanajuato, where Sister Ann went to assist them. And she was their first speaker ever at a state conference on domestic violence. It's my pleasure to introduce Sister Ann. She's one of my mentors.
Welcome to the first annual Summit on Domestic Violence. We are so happy to be co-hosting this event with the USC School of Social Work and hope for this extension of our relationship for many years to come. We began planning this summit much earlier in the year, but recent events with the NFL has certainly put this issue in focus nationwide. So it is with renewed attention that we begin this first summit. For those of you who are learning about Good Shepherd Shelter, I just want to give you a little bit of background. Good Shepherd Shelter is the first domestic violence shelter in the city of Los Angeles. But the sisters have been caring for abused children here in Los Angeles for 110 years. So we're kind of the pioneers here. We age well, don't you think? They didn't have the name domestic violence at that time, but trust me, there were an awful lot of people that were living the nightmare then and now. Once other domestic violence shelters were established, we started what we call a second step or second stage shelter to focus on healing and education as a way to provide a much more promising future for these families. We have a full school on site for the children, as well as an adult learning center for the mothers. Yesterday, the families had a domestic violence march in honor of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And the banners that you see around the room are the banners that they made for that march. At the end of the march, an 11-year-old girl stood up and gave a little speech, and she said, "Domestic violence is not an issue of women. It is not an issue of men. It is an issue of children, because of the children that witness it, that live with it, and that perpetuate it if they are not getting help." At Good Shepherd Shelter, that's exactly what we do. Our goal is to end the generational cycle of violence, and we do. 96% of the families who come to our shelter are continuing to live violence-free. So we also have an aftercare program in which the families stay in touch with us for many years. And so and some of them have become volunteers, staff, and even donors. We're so grateful also to welcome our panelists who are here, and we thank you so much for giving of your time, your expertise, and your heart. We are also very happy that all of you are here to join us for this very, very important event. We're especially glad that Dean Flynn is here to share this time with us. As many of you know, Dean Flynn is a transformational leader whose career has spanned appointments in higher education, consulting on strategic planning for county, government, and nonprofit organizations, practice in mental health and School of Social Work, membership on numerous boards at the local, national, and international levels. She is a recent inductee to the California Social Welfare's Archives Hall of Distinction. This induction is given to social workers who make major contributions to the field of social work. Also, the CSWA is only one of 2 organizations in the country that preserves the history of social work in their state. She was appointed Dean of the School of Social Work at the University of Southern California in 1997, only the 2nd woman to hold this position in the school's nearly 100-year history. During her tenure, she has expanded the school's faculty from 23 to 100 full-time faculty, who now offer graduate instruction on campus and across 38 states. At Good Shepherd Shelter, we are proud to partner with the School of Social Work, not only in this event, but also in having interns from the MSW program that work at the shelter. So Dean Flynn, before you come up to share your thoughts with us this morning, could you join me for a small token of appreciation of our support? This painting was done by the mothers at the shelter, and to explain it, all of the apples, I think they're apples, right? All the apples on the tree are the children, all the sheep are the moms, and the fields are purple for domestic violence.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Well, it's always very nice to have a token of appreciation before you speak. And so I'm very grateful. Thank you so much. I want to thank Carolann Peterson, who invited me to do this really some time ago. And at the time, that it was so distant from the actual event that I gladly agreed. And as the time approached, I thought, I don't know if I have something important to say to you all. And I really reflected on this, especially as the date grew closer and closer. And I actually think I do. I hope you feel the same way. The question is, what would be a topic that could set the tone for a year of thinking about innovation and change and new development in the domestic violence community. And I picked a topic, finally, that I think has absolutely no sex appeal at all. So when I mention it to you, you're going to, I think, initially say, well, what's exciting about this? The topic that I want to talk about briefly today is collaboration. And this is a very tired, old word. I think everybody is told it's what they should do. It's like make your bed, pick up your clothes, and collaborate. I mean, these are all in the same class of mandates. But actually, I think times are significantly different. This is an urgent question. It's an urgent question for everybody in the domestic violence community. And the reasons for the urgency are really because it's the biggest challenge for everybody who's interested in doing great social good today. It's a challenge for people working on the Affordable Care Act. It's a challenge for people working in the child protection community, for re-entering prisoners, for every aspect of social problem solving right now. Collaboration is more important than at any other time in the history of social services, human services, and health services. As we work in denser and denser urban areas with more service arrangements and complex relationships, absolutely to get our job done, we have to collaborate with others, not only in the same business that we're in, but in different businesses. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. Now, when I say collaboration, I don't mean just agency to agency, director to director. I mean people with boots on the ground. I mean people who are doing the day-to-day work. Collaboration has to take place and be developed at every level of agency functioning. It's really interesting that a survey that was done at that other institution across on the west side that some of you have heard about, they actually do good work, I have to say, and they did a survey. There was a survey conducted 2 years ago of nonprofit agencies across Los Angeles County, really trying to assess what were their greatest strengths in functioning and what were their greatest weaknesses. And the single weakest area of agency functioning was collaboration. People did a good job in resource development. People were interested in experimenting with services. People were developing good information systems. There was a lot of progress on a lot of fronts. And the single area where people were doing the least effective work, and I mean worker to worker and agency to agency, was in the area of collaboration. So I know we all live in our own silos. We do in social work, the domestic violence community does, child welfare community does. We all live in our own silos. But this is really not a good thing because it limits the range of ideas that we can consider comfortably, and probably worst of all, we actually lose influence when we only talk to each other. So one of the strongest reasons for collaboration is not just because you have to, and not just because it seems like we should, but because if you want real power behind the movement, you have to collaborate, and not just with the usual people. There are a lot of unexpected allies out there. And I've discovered this year that we've hired a couple of resident innovators. We brought them in from Chicago, and they visit us every couple of weeks, and they disrupt us. They're very disruptive, and everybody loves it, finally. Because what we're discovering is that there are conversations that we should be having completely outside the realm of what we've ever considered. Like Google. We should be talking to Google. And not just, can you give us money, please, but Google as a partner, Facebook as a partner. We can help them achieve their missions just as they can help us achieve ours. So really, by collaboration, moving way outside the normal range of people that we consider good guys and bad guys, and really reflecting in a different way on how we can achieve our potential for creating a peaceful society. If you think of how many people are invested in that goal, we have a huge range of potential partners that we never talk to. So, to talk for just a minute about my own experience with domestic violence, I have two encounters. One, a study that I did in 1980, when the domestic violence movement and the shelters and so on were just really maturing as a system. And I studied, did a comparison study of women who had asked for public assistance and moved on to the public assistance roles, and women in shelters, comparing the differences in there. Obviously, both groups were under-resourced, both groups were vulnerable, but trying to study the differences between these two groups of women who were obviously living under very stressful situations, but seeking different solutions. And what I discovered at that time was that the women who were moving into the shelters were, in fact, the most under-resourced group among all those who were either in poverty or experiencing extended unemployment. These women had exhausted everything before they came to the shelters, and therefore required more of us as a society than the women who were still strong enough to ask for assistance independently from other sources in society. And that recollection of the difference in the populations has stayed with me, and it was in the back of my mind when I was appointed to the Blue Ribbon Commission on Child Protection last year. The purpose of that commission was to prevent child fatalities in Los Angeles. I was the only social worker on the commission, and so I listened with special attentiveness when the testimony was presented to the commission about the importance of the connection between domestic violence and child maltreatment. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the results of the commission and its reports, but there is nothing in the final report about that relationship. There is nothing in the commission's report about increased resources for domestic violence shelters. There is nothing in that report that acknowledges that violent homes have severe consequences for children. Now, the case was really a strong one. We know that half of men and women who assault their spouses have also abused their children. We know that something between 30 to 60% of children who live in a home where there is domestic violence also suffer abuse and neglect. We know that kids who live in homes where there's domestic violence are sick more often. They complain of headaches, stomach aches, lethargy, fatigue, a whole range of symptoms. We know that a minimum of 3 million children every year witness domestic violence, and that if domestic violence is a learned behavior, we are setting up the cycle again. So the evidence that was presented to the commission about this relationship for me, was very compelling. But why did it have so little effect? Well, I think when I reflect back on the testimony that I heard, it was well presented, it was well thought out, but it was in one sense insular. In other words, you had to be familiar with the domestic violence community. You had to be somewhat familiar with the problems that people in the community, in the movement itself, usually talk about. In other words, you had to have your head inside the community a little bit before you could really hear the full case. And so for a group of people who were judges and public administrators and people from Casey Foundation nationally and so on, that's not what they usually think about, that's not what they usually hear, and I therefore think they heard almost none of it. So what's the message there? Is the message that these people are insensitive and incapable of hearing reasonable arguments? I don't think so. I think it's because we are all so accustomed to talking to each other that we forget how to talk to people who are outside our community. And we have to practice that, because if we don't practice it, there's no way to improve in a way. So why don't we practice more? Why don't we collaborate more? Why don't we talk to others, communicate more effectively with others? Because you would think it's a natural thing, and that if we just were more reflective, that's the direction which we'd move. Well, actually, there's several reasons that we don't collaborate more. First of all, the obvious ones, which is that people are operating under different funding and governmental mandates. So they're starting out from a different place, whether you're in a service organization, you're in the private sector, wherever you're starting from. And we all have different histories of development. We have different internal cultures that shape the way we think and what we think our objectives should be. We have different resources, and we have very different models of decision making. If you compare how decisions are made in the Department of Children and Family Service with how they're made at Good Shepherd, what would you say? We have got two different models. And it's very hard to get an intersection between those two processes. We have different focus on what we want to accomplish in our community partnerships. Most of us, to be frank, show up at these other community meetings just to protect our own territory, or to make sure we can control what we already do control and don't give up anything to anybody else. We see families at different times and points in the lifetime of the family itself. So when we talk about intervention, we're talking about intervention at very different stages in the evolution of a problem. So we're talking past each other when we're talking about problem solution. The biggest obstacles that I noted on the commission to cooperation, however, were first of all a concern about confidentiality. Information is power. And this is a very sensitive element, obviously, in the kinds of protections and so on that are offered in the domestic violence community, also in the child protection area. But one thing I did notice is that when I really examined it closely, there was a lot of information we could have shared across agencies and across programs that was not legally protected. I mean, it could have been shared and still respect all the legal mandates and program protections and so on. And people didn't share it for lots of reasons, but mostly it means you're in charge. You've got the information, you own the case. You own the progress. You own the outcome. That's a human problem. That's not a legal problem. That's not a program problem. The second thing was even more interesting to me, and that is the job of the commission was try to promote cross-sector solutions to child abuse and maltreatment. That meant, let's stop just saying that DCFS is responsible. Let's say the community's responsible. So that means probation's responsible. That means mental health, public health. It means the substance abuse community. It means everybody needs to work together. Well, that really sounds good, as I've been saying and saying. However, when I started interviewing, we did almost 300 interviews across all sectors in Los Angeles. When we started talking to people who are working on the ground with these problems about how to collaborate with each other better on behalf of clients, we found out that child protection people think the problem starts with the family. The sheriff's office thinks the problem starts if there's a crime. Mental health thinks that there's a problem if the environment is not healthy, and that may include the neighborhood itself. Substance abuse or education thinks there's a problem if people aren't coming to school. In other words, everybody has a completely different take on what you need to do to stop the bad behavior, to help. And everybody thinks everybody else is dumb because they don't agree that it should be the school, it should be the community health, it should be more medication, whatever. So part of this business of talking to each other is to learn how we can define problems in some common way, and that does take conversation. Another related problem was the systems and the interventions that we use, because that is related to how we define the problem. So each of us has the shelter concept is a system of intervention. The shelter concept actually doesn't fit particularly well at all with some other models of intervention. And the question is how you can make the connections between very different ways of defining and helping. There are some evidence-based practices and some other approaches that we don't have time to talk about today that might take us all together down the same road, and that might be something to talk about in the future. But I think this is why we've made so little progress. So what might be the next steps, just to conclude? Well, I want to comment that there are training funds available through Title IV-E to help develop common practice approaches. And I don't think the domestic violence community, broadly speaking, has participated in these training or even really thought about how we might apply those funds to the training of interns and staff. And this would be joint training, not training by ourselves, but training in the mental health, domestic violence, and child welfare community in the same room at the same time, thinking about the same models or compatible models. I've already mentioned there's allies out there we've never tapped. You're going to hear, I think from the NFL or somebody who's on, yes? Yeah. But the sports community, the professional sports community, Google, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. There's a whole group of people out there, if we sat and had a conversation, that have a stake in the problem that you care about. And we would say, well, how do you talk to them? Well, the answer is you open your mouth. You pick up the phone, you say who you are. They say, I don't care about you. You say, well, too bad, and then you try somebody else. It's developing a sense of shared mission. And you have a mission, the mission of peace, really, at heart, that is shared by so many people. You have an opportunity to influence communications by talking to broader audiences outside the movement itself and practicing that. I've started. It's very scary. I see why nobody does it. But it's okay. It's a way of building your sense of who you are, how people perceive you, and who you can become. It's a wonderful thing to try after you get over the fear, if you ever get over it. Most importantly, what I'm pushing toward here is giving yourself the opportunity to ask different questions so you can come up with different solutions. To push yourself into meeting people and into areas where you don't normally explore, so that your head opens up to new possibilities. You know, collaborating, real collaborating is like a marriage when I think about it. So you have to have problem-solving skills and commitment. You have to have mechanisms for communication, and you have to keep your eyes on the prize and not just yourself. So I think we can be much more successful than we are in developing resources, public attention, and influence. I want to encourage you to do that. I think collaboration with new groups is a very powerful mechanism for doing that. And if you're interested in exploring some of the ideas out there, I would suggest that you open your browser and look up the Child Welfare Information Gateway. There's a spotlight on domestic violence and cross-system collaboration in the Gateway that has some incredibly good ideas that have been used in other communities and have, in some cases, been quite effective, and some ideas about new evidence-based strategies that might be of value to the community here. So I encourage you to collaborate. I've enjoyed this collaboration with Good Shepherd, and I hope you have a wonderful and productive day. Thank you.
So we're thrilled to hear your comments on that and broadening it for us considerably. So I'd like to introduce our first panel of the Faces of Domestic Violence, and Astrid. Astrid is a Good Shepherd volunteer, which means she's a full-time volunteer, live-in volunteer for a full year, just like the Peace Corps. So we're delighted to have her hosting this.
Again, thank you for being with us today. We're really excited to have you all. We're going to begin our panel, like we said, the Faces of Domestic Violence, A Path Forward. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. We have Norma Cumpian. We have Kady Aldatz. Sue's probably going to be found. And we have Chantal Barlow.
Well, my story starts a long time ago. In 1992, I was in an abusive relationship, and unfortunately, I wanted to stop what was going on, and I chose the worst way possible. And I was pregnant with my son, and I killed my abuser. I didn't mean to do it, which sounds weird 20-something years later, but that's the truth. I thought I was making a statement. I'm sure those of you who were in my situation can understand that. So began my 18 years of incarceration. I was convicted, I was offered a manslaughter, and I didn't take it. I didn't really understand what that meant. I didn't understand the law. I thought that law and order was going to help me navigate the system. So I was ultimately convicted of second-degree murder, +4. So I went to prison. My son, I was out on bail, and I had my son in the regular hospital, but I left when he was 5 months old. So I even today, I still tear up when I see a 5-month-old child. So when I got to prison, I thought it was just like Law and Order, and it was just like the movies. And in fact, it wasn't really. I met women in there that were just like me, that were actually really good people that just made mistakes. And this group of women, they were called lifers, and at that time, no one was going home. So there was no parole date. And I kept arguing with people, telling them, no, actually, there is, because when I was at court, they said this and they said that, and they said, look around you. There are people that did less than you and have been here for 30 years. And so I spent a lot of time looking at other people and pointing my finger at them and saying, well, I can't believe she has less time than me. Well, that's not fair. Well, that sucks. So once I got over that, and I started looking at myself and what I could do, I realized I'm in this situation. I may never get out of here. I have this little boy. My parents, I was fortunate enough through a weird series of events to get to Corona, California, and my parents lived in Orange County. So my dad would bring my son to visit me all the time. And I couldn't let his life go to waste. I was just determined to do something. Like, what could I do? Here I am, I'm his mother, I'm in prison for the death of his dad, I'm a lifer, I'm like on the bottom of the totem pole in society. Like, what could I possibly do? Please. But through the women that I was there with, and through just people who cared, people who didn't believe that my life was thrown away, people who believed that my son's life had value, they said, you know what, one person can make a difference in the life of a child. One person. Why don't you try to be that person? So I did. My mother, who's crazy, but anyway, that's another story, said to me, why don't you live your life like your child is standing next to you? Every time you make a decision, pretend that your son's right there. And every time you have to make a choice, why don't you pretend your son's right there? And so I tried to do that. I was not always successful, but I tried to live my life like that. I worked in mental health for about 10 years. I worked with the incarcerated mentally ill. When I say that today, I'm like, were you insane yourself? Like, what is wrong with you? Why would you do that? You could have just watched TV. You know, you could have known every episode of Seinfeld by now. So I worked with them, and I learned so much about human beings and about the tragedies that we all go through as women, and that some people just couldn't get up from those hurts. Some people, they just couldn't. It was so much. They used drugs, and they kept coming to prison, and I learned to love those women too. So I went to school. I trained dogs. I was a tutor. After I received my degree, I became a tutor and helped other women. And I finally was found suitable. Actually, Heidi Rummel is a professor here at USC, and she was my attorney. She still is my attorney. I tell her that I say that because it makes me sound super wealthy. So she, we went, and I was found suitable by the board, and then the Governor Arnold reversed it, which was devastating. And then I was found suitable again a year later, and people told me, you should tell your son the truth about our system. You know, it sucks. And so I told my son, I didn't do anything wrong, nothing's changed, but the governor reversed the decision again. And he said, how do you feel about that, Mom? And I said, we live in the best country in the world. This is our system right now, and we have to work to fight and change it. So I finally got out in 2010, and my son, I had just missed my son, he went to boot camp. And so we both we're kind of adults at the same time. It's been really weird. I had to go to a transitional home, and so he was at boot camp, and I was like, wow, we're like in the same place. This is really weird. So I met a nun when I was in prison, and her name is Sister Suzanne J. Rowe. She's a Sisters, St. Joseph of Carondelet, and she hired me at the Office of Restorative Justice Works in North Hollywood, and so I swear this, I know my son, I swear this is the truth, but I used to get up at 4:30 in the morning, I swear. But there wasn't any snow, but I'm telling you, I got up at 4:30 in the morning, and I would take the Metrolink from Claremont to North Hollywood every morning, and I actually really liked it. I know normal people were like, are you crazy? I'm like, what? It's so fascinating on that red line. Oh my gosh, there's a guy with a dress, there's another guy with a bike, without a tire, like it's awesome. So I did that for a while, and I worked part-time and sort of made my way with my big mouth and became their coordinator of Get on the Bus. And Get on the Bus is a program that takes children to see their moms and dads in prison. And so now I'm the program coordinator of Get on the Bus. And I work with the families and work with the volunteers, and we're supported by donations, yearly donations, and I get to talk to kids, to see their moms, and a lot of our kids are ashamed of having a person in prison. I'm ashamed sometimes, and I know that I can actually be a voice for the women that are still inside. And I know that as much as I want to just stay in my room and watch Seinfeld, because I swear that a lot of those are really relevant. I mean, just come on. But I want to do that, and a part of me wants to just stick my head in the sand. But I know that as formerly incarcerated people and as formerly women, sort of victims, sort of survivors of domestic violence, that I have to do this. I have to take the opportunity to show a face to domestic violence and show a face to people who were formerly incarcerated. Otherwise, we're not going to get any stronger if we are just shrouded in shame. And so I get to do it. It's an honor to get to do it.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kady Aldatz. I'm 24 years old. I come from a long line of domestic violence. I have a very large family. I'm one of 11 siblings. I've never told my story to a large-scale audience, so please excuse me if I get a little emotional. My first experience with domestic violence is also my first memory. I was 4 years old. My father was hitting my mother repeatedly. I remember at that moment, I didn't understand what was going on because I was 4 years old, but I knew that what was happening was wrong. I knew that I needed to take action. And I pretty much love it. I knew that I had to take action, and that's exactly what I did. My brother, who was 7 at the time, came over to me to comfort me because I was having an influx of emotion, which just overwhelmed me, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I had to stop my father from hitting my mother. And so I told my brother, grab the bats in the hallway closet. And he did that. He gave me a bat, and we struck our father. He stopped. He broke down, started crying, saying, "I'm sorry, Mija. I'm so sorry." A year later, my mom and father split up. My father was a heavy alcoholic, and he was also a heroin user. So he chose to leave, which we thought was for the better. But my mom repeated the cycle. And I see now why. She came from abuse, and so did my father. My mom was abused by her brothers. So a lot of people don't talk about sibling abuse, but it happens, and it happens often. And so she met another man who I don't even like giving that title to because I referred to him as the devil as a child. The first year I called the wrangling year. He was like a cowboy and we were his cattle, and he wrangled us in. He made us believe that he was this nice man that was going to change our lives and give us the world and love our mom unconditionally. That didn't happen. The next 4 years that followed, it was an everyday ordeal of violence in the home, and hitting my mother, breaking bones, leaving her immobile for months, emotional abuse to us. I remember I was about 7 years old and the police came into her house at like 3 in the morning. Their bright lights right in our face, woke us up out of our sleep, get up. There was some disconnect. I felt like they weren't there to help us. They were there to, I still don't even understand why they were there because nothing came of it. They took us up out of our sleep, they checked our bodies. Then we went back to sleep the next day. CPS came to the school. And during this time, I became a master liar at the age of 7 years old. And so did my brothers. And they would ask us questions, and we knew what to say. Almost like we would look at each other and we just automatically knew how to address them to where we wouldn't be found out, so they wouldn't take us away. And it wasn't because we were afraid. We were afraid of losing each other. See, my mom, I never really felt like she knew how to love. So she was never affectionate, never told us she loved us. So I relied on my brothers for love. So I lied. I lied knowing that it was wrong. And we got away. They let us go back to our mom. We went on living our life. We ended up getting evicted, living in a van for 2 months. The abuse was continuous every day. My mom was hit. There was things I saw that I was not supposed to see, hear, or feel as a child. And as a girl, I felt like I was really good at masking that to the world. So here I was. I was not the norm. I excelled in school. I was popular. I played sports. But I was bad. And eventually, we went into a motel shortly after the ban. We were on welfare pretty much our entire life, so we were very poor. We weren't going to school at this time because we didn't have a physical address to actually enroll us. So there was a night that I remember the details so vividly because it was the first night that I actually felt like this guy that was the father of my 3 younger siblings and someone that I looked up to as a father figure, which he was not, beat my mom to a pulp and threatened to kill her in front of all of us. We were afraid. He took off the next morning. It was like counting the minutes away until checkout time at the motel. Struck 11. We had to be out. And we grabbed all our stuff. Here we are, my mom, 6 siblings. My mom just had her baby, so my youngest sibling was 2 months old at the time. And CPS comes and shows up 5 hours later, takes us, and I felt like it was interrogation for like 5 hours straight. They took us into a small room, gathered all of us. There was 3 separate families there, and immediately I knew what was happening. We were separated. And we went into foster care. My mom got help from her family. They intervened. My eldest sister got an emergency court hearing. And those 5 days of my life in that foster care were the longest 5 days of my life. The emotions leading up to getting to the courthouse were overwhelming. I was sad, I was mad, I was angry, I was rebelling. I didn't want to live anymore. My mom ended up getting custody of us, and they ordered us to go into a battered women's shelter, and we did just that. We went, I can't recall the name exactly, but it was somewhere in Long Beach, which actually turned out to be a blessing in disguise, because my youngest sister, the newborn, she was 2 months old at the time, came down with severe pneumonia, and we were 5 minutes away from one of the best children's hospital in Long Beach. And she ended up having lobar emphysema and had to have emergency surgery. The chances of her surviving were basically slim to none, but she did, and her name is Destiny. What a coincidence. And from that very moment, we went back to the shelter and were told that we were being moved to another shelter, and that was the Good Shepherd shelter. And when I speak about them today, I don't talk about them as the Good Shepherd shelter. I refer to them as the Good Shepherd angels, because they saved our lives. And we had in-house schooling, therapy, volunteers that really touched me, teachers, and I saw a light in all of them, and I really latched onto that. And I think all kids in my situation need that. They need someone to be able to talk to, because we bottle it up. And like I said, we mask it, and we become this different person to the world. But inside, we're just a child scared. We need people. I mean, this program, we were there for 2.5 years, and I believe we were the longest family to ever have stayed up here. I did not want to leave. This was my home. The sisters were like mothers to me. Just reflecting on it always brings back so many good memories. But what I like to say about the experience is that I felt comfortable and safe. And I think that's what the most important thing is for these kids. So we can actually open up and figure out what's going on inside of here and fix it. And that's what they helped us do. So I like to say that they planted a seed inside of our family, and they were our light to help us grow. And the chains and that cycle of abuse ends with me and will never go forward. It will never happen on my watch, ever. And my brothers understand that. And now if we ever see anyone that we feel was in a similar situation as us, we act. We do not turn a blind eye. And I think that's the most important thing, is helping one another. Because in society, we are so disconnected. So disconnected. I'm like walking down the street and I see people homeless that I relate to while I'm chugging down a $7 latte, thinking, what the hell's wrong with me? You know, I feel like we have to give back. And I want to thank the Good Shepherd Shelter for helping us and helping my family. You did a great job. I wouldn't have been here without you, Mandy. specifically. You're my light. You're my light. Thank you.
Thank you, Good Shepherd Shelter, for having us here today. It's a pleasure and honor to be here in front of you all at USC. You may have noticed portraits on the screens earlier this morning. These are portraits from the Unconventional Apology Project, a portrait and interview series I've created to highlight survivors of domestic violence. The best way for me to start off for you to understand the context of everything is the story of my family and what happened. In 1975, in Compton, my grandfather, a raging alcoholic, shot my grandmother to death when she was 36. 2 days after their divorce was final, my father was present and held his dying mother. My 6 aunts and uncles and my father were scattered around the streets of Los Angeles, left to fend for themselves. My grandfather was never tried by any system of justice. In fact, he lived a very long life and had meaningful, close relationships with everyone in the family. He was well known amongst family and friends to be an avid photographer, taking thousands of photos in his lifetime, documenting his own trail of existence. My grandmother's existence is nearly completely non-existent. I currently only have 3 photos of her, one of which was found by my uncle just last week. My grandfather passed away nearly a 1.5 years ago and left me his beloved camera. I easily made a connection with his camera. I felt so powerful to hold it in my hands. I knew instantly what I was going to do. I wanted to create a trail of existence for women who are survivors of domestic abuse. Creating the trail of existence my grandmother was stripped of. The project will be done in a series of 36 portraits per series representing the age my grandmother was when she was murdered. We are currently in the stages of planning the exhibit. The date is to be determined and will be here in Los Angeles. It's been so important to highlight the survivors instead of the abusers because they've largely been left out of the national conversation and are silenced in general. Unfortunately, there's no shortage of examples in the media for this. I deliberately don't edit their stories, so the interviews truly do reflect all of their voices. It's been an honor to have all of these women come forward, and some actually fly in from other states to participate and reclaim their voice on their terms. I just want to say that it's been quite a journey, even for my own family. It's been very healing for all of us. I actually didn't know what happened to my grandmother until I was about 16. I remember asking questions to my mother. She of course, would always try to give me age-appropriate answers along the way. Finally, in a private moment with my father, he finally explained to me all the tragic details of what happened. And of course, I had a lot of emotional conflict due to the fact that I already had a loving relationship with this man that I knew to be my grandfather. And to know the details was just very hard, especially since my mother, when she immigrated to the United States, she was severely beaten by her first husband. And to know how close all of it was just exceptionally scary. So to be able to have a platform to lend survivors an opportunity, and it's been fascinating to hear, hear these women thank me the way that they have for an opportunity just to speak, and much like what you were saying, how children, and adults do the same, where they kind of lie by omission, essentially, to make sure that everything seems okay. And I'm thankful to really just be part of the vehicle. I don't. It's strange to still be thanked when I just feel like it's the right thing to be doing, and I'm very thankful for the Good Shepherd Shelter to consistently lend their support and help. And we were actually recently endorsed by the City of Los Angeles for the work that we're doing as well.
So I'll take probably 1 or 2 questions because of time, but if anyone has any dying questions well, first, can we give them a hand? They're just amazing. So if anyone has any questions, if you could raise your hand, and then you're just going to have to project your voice, as we like to do that in all of our venues, in our avenues, I think, is to project our voice and make sure we're heard. So if anyone has any questions. Okay. There we go.
Would you have any advice for people who are going through it right now and don't know how to express it? Like, what advice do you have for them right now?
So the question is, what advice do our panelists have for people that are going through this journey currently and are not sure how to express their feelings or emotions? Does anyone have?
I have an answer for children. And for adults too. I think by spreading awareness, we need to let people know they're not alone. And I think that's what we did when we were younger, is we shut off. Having available resources for these children, and just having people that will reach out, because I can't even explain to you how many people touched me. Even though it may not seem like I was being touched, I took these memories with me forever. So I think just for kids out there to be able to get involved in programs where there's other children or women that are like-minded, that have likewise situations that they were in, so they can relate. Because I think that's the biggest thing, is being able to relate with people. Because it's so quick for us to think, oh, they're going to judge us. I don't feel comfortable saying this, but if you reach out, and I found programs, I was speaking to Jessica in the back, Jessica, and she's with, I can't recall, but you do something with children, and I just thought it was great. And if I had that resource at a younger age, I could only imagine what I could have done with it, but the Good Shepherd Shelter has really helped me. So I think just going out there and finding the resources to help, or offering a hand and leading them in the right direction to where they feel comfortable expressing what they've gone through so they can actually get help.
I would like to say too that, speaking on it comes in a lot of different forms. It doesn't happen in this platform. It can happen with a stranger on the beach. It can also happen with the smallest step of admitting to yourself that what is happening is not correct and right, and most people feel that in the bottom of their heart. They know that this isn't a healthy situation, even if they can't name it. And thankfully, we do live in a day and age where there are resources available, whether they're very public or very private, even forums, let's say on Facebook. I've had people reach out to me and say that they have a little private group that they invite people so that other women can speak to each other, which is another really safe way of not speaking on it so openly, let's say in a public forum such as this. But the women that have participated in the project, most of them have not had the opportunity to speak about it, or if they have, it's been very, very strategic, because the fear is attached to the loss of a relationship through a parent or their own child, or the fear of, it's really the fearing the loss of just really anything. And so a lot of them, they hold it in because they don't want to lose, you know, their reputation, even how somebody views them. But I really think it's just important to take small steps, because not everyone is willing to be on a panel, let's say, and share their story, but being an open ear, and I think is a very important step.
Well, thank you so much for that question. I think that helps us as listeners to be supportive. And due to time, we're on to the next panel. So thank you again to Kady.
So this panel kind of brings together the two talks that we've had so far. Good Shepherd Shelter has had a long history of collaborations with mental health agencies. We've always had agencies who have provided therapeutic services on site. And we think that's why we're so successful, because we really focus on healing the person first. So it's with great pleasure for me to introduce Liza Auciello, Executive Director of 1,000 Joys. And Dr. Yes? Dr. Leslie Ann Ross with Children's Institute International, Child Trauma Treatment. And Sherisa Dahlgren, excuse me, Vice President of Clinical Programs for the Joyful Heart Foundation. So to be able to get right to what these amazing women have to say, I think a good place to start is for each of you to tell us about your history with Good Shepherd Shelter and why your agency, or you specifically, chose to work with Good Shepherd Shelter.
Actually, we all started working with Good Shepherd Shelter at the same time. Yeah, well, I'll let you talk about CII, but I worked with 1,000 Joys, and my organization worked with Good Shepherd initially just to help them look at their programs and make sure they were comprehensive. And as part of that, we collaborated with CII, and we all worked with CII together, so that's how we knew each other. CII is Children's Institute, and we piloted a program together. Leslie will tell you about the whole person domestic violence curriculum, and 1,000 Joys and CII put this curriculum together to help. I guess we boosted the coping skills component of it, bringing yoga, meditation, mindfulness, and other healing methods to Good Shepherd. And today we do coaching, consultation, and training with the Good Shepherd staff.
So I just want to take a second before, am I on? Okay, there we go. Before I get into what CII is, and I really just want to take a moment to acknowledge the bravery of the women that shared their story. And yes, and how grateful that I am that you didn't choose to just watch Seinfeld, and that all three of you are choosing a difficult path that will make a tremendous difference. I have been working in the field of child trauma and domestic violence for more decades than I'd like to talk about, so I won't talk about the numbers, but when I hear those stories, that's what moves me to do this work. So not only do you get to help other children and women, and men even, that have been exposed to domestic violence, you also get to inspire us over and over, those of us who are leaders in this field, to continue to do this work, to support victims of domestic violence and the children and the families that are involved. So I also want to say, Children's Institute it's a little younger than Good Shepherd, but we've been around for 100 years, and in Los Angeles also, and have served 100 years ago, although I haven't been with them for quite that long, it feels like it sometimes. Wayward girls, that's what folks were called 100 years ago. But it's kind of exciting to be part of a community that's been doing this work for so long. Makes me feel like a relative newcomer. But to get back to our relationship with Good Shepherd, CII has been involved with Good Shepherd for a long time, thanks to the wonderful leadership of Raul Alvarado, who is the head of 1,000 Joys, but also was the president of our board at CII for many years. And so, sort of, Dean Flynn talked a lot about collaboration, and I think this is such a great example of community collaboration, different silos coming together. So he worked very hard to bring us all together, and in fact hosted in 2005, I believe it was, a think tank looking at how to incorporate complementary and alternative, more somatic approaches into the treatment of domestic violence, and particularly for children. And this was actually a brilliant idea back then. Now, in some of the current research, we know that because trauma is really experienced in the body, and it was wonderful to listen to the story about, your first memory as a 4-year-old was of violence, right? So many of our children's memories happen before they have words. And so they experience that in their body. And as an adult, as they're growing up, they might be triggered or have experiences as a result of that, but they don't have words for it. So some of the work that Liza was just talking about, this idea of doing movement or mindfulness or other things to reconnect with how to gain more mastery over your experience, is really critical for people who have had that level of exposure for so long. And so even though we started way back then in this collaborative process to explore this, we are finding out more and more that the literature and the research is supporting that. And so the movement continues to go in that direction. The three of us a decade ago were involved in putting together a domestic violence treatment intervention for adult victims and children down to as little as we could work with them, really around 4 or 5. And the ones that are littler than that, then we work with the moms and the kids together. And the idea is that by doing this work, that we get to create transformations, much like we heard today, where we're saying no, that there is not going to be another cycle of violence for these families. So not only does it make change for that one individual, but it makes change in their immediate family and for their children and their community. And by this kind of collaboration, we can really put an end to domestic violence.
Thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me okay? Yes. I know, it was like you're kissing, all right? So my name is Sherisa Dahlgren, and I'm the Vice President of Clinical Programs at Joyful Heart Foundation. And I will address the question. I will address the question of the relationship with Good Shepherd, but I'm guessing for many of you, Joyful Heart may feel new to you. So just really quickly a little about who we are. Joyful Heart Foundation was founded 10 years ago by Mariska Hargitay, who plays Detective Olivia Benson on Law & Order SVU. And she really founded Joyful Heart Foundation because, she was familiar with having fan mail. From her role on ER, she was familiar with being in the limelight. But when she took on the role of a sex crimes detective, her fan mail really shifted. And so it shifted from, where do I get that blouse? I totally love your lipstick, to, hi, my name is, and I've been in a domestic violence relationship for 40 years and I've never told anyone. Hi, my name is, and I was sexually assaulted when I was 16 and repeatedly throughout my life, and I've never told anyone. So she got literally thousands of flood of these fan mail coming in, and she said, how can I be a well-resourced, educated individual in this society and have no idea about the true statistics and impact of domestic violence and sexual assault? So from there, she founded Joyful Heart Foundation really as an answer to that fan mail, because she recognized that as we are currently in the field, the resources do not meet the need, and there is a huge need for true collaboration and bringing different partners to the table, and that's what she really wanted to do. So we do that through many different ways. We do that through education and awareness, and I don't know if any of you have seen in the NFL the commercials on No More.
Yeah.
So that's one of the programs that we have been collaborating along across the field. So how can we start bringing attention to this issue in a way that can shift cultural norms? So we take on projects that oftentimes agencies that have direct service responsibilities don't have the time or the energy and oftentimes the resources to be able to do. So we have many other programs. One that we're doing here in Los Angeles is researching a model using retreats for the treatment of trauma for sexual assault and domestic violence, which we're researching now with Georgetown University. So we come to this issue from a slightly different perspective, from different resources. So it was so wonderful to have the keynote talking about collaboration, because I think that's one of the things or gifts that we can try and bring to the field, is bringing different partners to the table. So how come I'm here with these beautiful, lovely ladies? I did start at Children's Institute as well. I've been working in the field for about 20 years. I'm okay to claim that, right? And
she also has not been at CII for 100 years.
Yes. So I've been in the field for 20. I started actually as an intern at Children's Institute, and at that time met Leslie and I met Liza, and was there at the beginning when the collaboration started with Good Shepherd Shelter. So I was actually one of the therapists that helped treat the families at the shelter, but also coordinate bringing in the mental health services and kind of helping to establish that collaboration, which we were all, I think, very involved in. And then I also had the pleasure of helping to co-author the curriculum that Leslie has been talking about on the whole person approach. So I have a long history with these beautiful people, and I see you in the audience, Sister Donna. I need a hug later.
I forgot one thing. In the spirit of collaboration, CII has a formal intern program. We go out of our way as much as possible to identify people in the interview process that are interested in working in the field of domestic violence, and we help to get them to be partnering with Good Shepherd and being able to come in and provide services there. So when you talk about the spirit of collaboration, it's another way actually that we're not only collaborating with each other, but also in partnership with you as well.
Thank you so much. So I think the first question will be for Leslie. Can you please describe CII's model and how it addresses best practice and trauma-informed care for domestic violence survivors?
In 5 minutes or less.
Yeah.
Sure. I had the privilege last week of being able to speak at a conference. I actually even stayed in a hotel, the Marriott Hotel in Torrance. It was really super exciting. Never stayed in a hotel in Torrance before. Anyway, John Breer had a conference on his model, the integrated treatment of complex trauma. Anybody familiar with John Breer's work? He's actually on the faculty, okay, one person in the back, on the faculty here at USC. He's been in the field of child trauma for more decades than I have. He's a past president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, has written literally hundreds of articles and books, and is really a leader in this work. And the model that he uses is, he talks about complex trauma. The reason that I'm bringing this up is that much of the work that I have put into designing and developing this model is based on this idea of complex trauma. The reason that we talk about that, if I look back on the stories that we heard, very often when you talk about treating trauma, you talk about, well, I fell off my bike, or I was in a car accident, or something happened, and so I need to do a little bit of work to recover from the aftermath or the traumatic response associated with that. What we're talking about here with these stories and these families is something really radically different. And some of the elements that they shared, I think, are really critically important. Like, for instance, your first memory at 4 being of violence, having no memory of having a loving relationship with your mother. So part of what we know about the science of trauma is that you have a different experience when there is trauma in those 0 to 5 time frame. Because this is the time where we are developing a sense of safety. We call it attachment in the mental health field. But they're really a critical time where we learn how to relate to other people, how to feel a sense of safety that impacts our relationships for the rest of our lives. If you grow up in an environment where there is violence and you are not able to ever feel safe in your body or in your environment, you don't have the opportunity to develop those skills to have normal emotional responses that feel safe, to be in a safe environment, to be able to focus on school, if you're even allowed to go to school, because you're too on alert all the time. So no wonder these kids are showing up being sick or having these chronic illnesses, because they are under chronic stress, sometimes even before they're born. So this idea of having a model that addresses what we call complex trauma incorporates looking at that relational disruption that happens from 0 to 5 and the impact on relationships then, and how do you repair that? So then you have kids that are a little bit older who are at 7 experts at lying, right? How do they come to a place of feeling okay with their own story, their own life? How do they make meaning out of their experience? This is actually critical for their successful development into human beings, and that's why it's so great to hear the story that these women shared, because part of, I'm sure, how they're making sense of what happened to them is by doing the great work that they're doing now, to be able to talk openly and truthfully about their experience. So not only are we focusing on the specific recovery of trauma, and again, I spoke a few minutes ago about how that's experienced in the body, so you have to address that in some way in the body. But it's also critically important to look at some of these other aspects, like functioning within relationships, a sense of empowerment and belief in yourself, a sense of mastery over your own emotional reactions. So if somebody comes up next to you, you're not immediately experiencing them as somebody who's going to attack you, right? But it's neutral. You know, John Muir was making fun of me when we were doing this presentation, and he was talking about, you know, when you walk into a room, he says, I'm sitting here in this room, and somebody comes in the door, and I'm immediately like on alert, you know, field sector 10, intruder, and Dr. Ross here is like, oh, it's a friend, let me go meet them, which is so my nature. It was really kind of funny. But it's true. When you have an experience of trauma and you grow up in an environment that is not safe, you perceive the world as dangerous when you're 7, when you're 4. So part of our work in doing and implementing this model is making changes around that. It's not just a simple, oh, you know, you have these triggers, we need to do some relaxation exercises and you'll get over it. It's really working with the whole family and the whole community to create change and to really re-experience your life in a new way, to recover from those parts that are broken, to then develop the resilience to get up here in front, and I just know how hard that is, to get up here in front of this group of people and tell your story, right? To be that resilient. And then to create this sense of readiness for what's next. And that means successfully getting into kindergarten, successfully developing the capacity to have a romantic relationship, being ready to be a parent yourself, being ready to go out and get a job when maybe you've never had one. So that's what our model does. It creates this opportunity for these families to be successful at what's next. And one of the things that I so admire about the Good Shepherd Shelter is that they really are family. I don't care if you went there 100 years ago, you are always welcome back. They are always there for you. They are that family that is there and open and loving no matter what. So it goes over and above what we can offer at an organization like Children's Institute, where we just offer clinical services. They offer family and community.
Thank you so much. Next question will be for Liza. In your work with organizations and mental health professionals, what have you learned that helps to ensure a trauma-informed approach? What are the best practices as you see them?
So at 1,000 Joys, our mission is to help individuals and organizations reach their highest potential. So we do a lot of work with organizations and the staff who provide services to clients. And you know, this will be on the Good Shepherd website. I put together a little PowerPoint. But I wrote a trauma-informed organization equals a great place to work and heal. And listening to the panelists who were here before us, it's clear that Good Shepherd Shelter is a great place to heal. And having talked to the staff who work there, it's also a great place to work. So when I think of what are the benefits of being a trauma-informed organization, you have clients who have better treatment outcomes. There are effective and holistic services available that are manageable, and people can choose what works for them. And the theme that the clients feel physically and emotionally safe and trusting in the organization. And when an organization is trauma-informed, the staff are also healthy and well. They have the ability to manage stress and the impact of trauma. They have high job satisfaction. They have a balanced work and home life, and they could potentially have longevity in the field. And there are lots of benefits for the organization, which is a little bit more boring, so I'm going to pass that part. But a trauma, becoming a trauma-informed organization is a process. It's a multiple-year process. You set the foundation by training your people and having a healthy and skilled workforce, and the environment supports healing. The leadership is committed to a trauma-informed philosophy, and they actually carry out trauma-informed practices. And it takes a couple of years to put things in place. And then eventually trauma-informed best practices are the norm. So there's a process, and it starts with an assessment. But what I'm noticing, or going to your question now, what I've learned about trauma-informed care and how organizations are handling it, most organizations are making shifts in how they train their staff. So they're normalizing the impact of exposure to trauma. They're increasing their staff skill set, specifically related to coping, communication, and conflict management. And the leaders are giving clear, kind, compassionate messages that are consistent across the agency. Other shifts that I'm noticing is that paid time off is being handled differently in organizations, and the expectation is that you will take all of your vacation and sick time. And you're encouraged to have wellness days, or to take wellness days. I know you recently implemented that at CII, right? So there's wellness days instead of illness days. And if you're sick, take a sick day. But we want people to plan ahead to take care of themselves. I'm also noticing a shift in how people are creating their budgets, or how organizations are creating their budgets. They're actually accounting for all that time off and any trainings that they do to avoid putting undue pressure on staff who are already doing a really hard job. They're also integrating self-care practices into the work activities, so maybe 2 to 5 minute self-care practices during supervision or group meetings. We work with one organization that actually twice a day over the intercom asks the staff and the visitors and clients to stop and take a moment to do a breathing activity, or get up and stretch, or just do something to take care of themselves. I'm noticing that agencies are also valuing work and home life balance, and that they're trying to pay attention to, and some are doing it better than others, but varying the work activities that the direct service providers do. So instead of 30 hours of direct service every day, they'll encourage them, or give them activities that encourage hope. So they'll do presentations or outreach activities just to vary it a little. And from an individual level, this is a really important thing for me, and I think we all kind of resonate with this. Like, we have an individual, we have a responsibility to learn about ourselves. And the 2 big areas that I see, the shifts that individuals are making, they're creating a wellness plan for themselves. So they're actually assessing, and if necessary, improving their physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health. They're integrating self-care both inside of work and outside. They're balancing work and home life, and they're actually starting to use and plan time off for wellness and fun. And then the other key thing is they're reaching out for peer support. They share lunch together, exercise together during lunch breaks or after work. They send encouraging messages to each other via text or email. And the biggest thing is they're making a conscious effort to focus on gratitude, fun, laughing, and optimism. Because it's really easy to get down and to be, start focusing on what's negative or feels bad. So the staff that we've been working with are making a conscious effort to change that. So,
thank you so much for those explaining that. I think as we have new social workers in the room, it's very important to hear all this. We are getting a little bit close to the end of our time. We have about 10 or 15 more minutes, and I want to hear from Sherisa before we open it up for questions and answers, to hear what's being done on a national level to advocate for trauma-informed care. You spoke a little bit about what you're doing, but I wonder if there's more that you have to say about that topic.
Thank you, Mandy. Before answering that, and I'm actually, I think Leslie may be the better person to answer that question than me, but I'll share my perspective. But I want to take a step back because I think we keep saying trauma-informed care, but I'm uncertain if everyone fully sort of understands that definition. So I'm going to share what I think of when I think of trauma-informed care. And I think of that as a lens, or how do we view those individuals that we are serving. So if you are coming from a perspective of a trauma-informed lens, if you are seeing somebody and you're working with a child, somebody might say that child is lying, and somebody coming from more of a trauma-informed lens might say, what is that child trying to communicate to me right now, given the challenges that are in their life? Or if you're working with a mom and she's doing everything in her power to protect, to keep her family safe, you might say, if you're not coming from a trauma-informed lens, every time I talk to her, she says something different. She's just trying to manipulate to get her way. Or if you're coming from a trauma-informed lens, you will say, wow, this is a family that is trying every possible avenue to keep themselves together and alive. So I just want to sort of take a step back, because in order to accomplish trauma-informed care, you need what Leslie was talking about in terms of like strategies for the treatment of complex trauma. You need what Liza's talking about in terms of creating healthy organizations so that staff can come from that viewpoint. Because when you engage in this work day in and day out, and year in and year out, it can become a challenge to keep that frame of reference when you see pain and you bear witness to suffering on a regular basis. So trauma-informed care is also about connecting in with that hope and optimism on a regular basis so that we can engage in this work with resiliency. So I know that doesn't answer your question, but I wanted to sort of just be able to provide a little bit of that as a framework. In terms of what's happening nationally, I do think Leslie's the better expert to talk about systems change, but I would love to just share a little bit first about what I think is needed and how we are doing our best to accomplish that. One thing that's needed is, just like we were talking about at the very beginning, is collaboration. Any one of these things alone is not going to create the shift that is needed to be able to have trauma-informed care be the common practice. Like when I go, we've been doing a lot of work in Detroit because we work on helping to end the rape kit backlog, or the rape kits that are untested across the nation. And so when we go in there, we work as well as we can holistically throughout the whole city. And I say something like trauma-informed care there, and I look like I might as well be talking in a different language. They have one of the highest rates of domestic violence and sexual assault, and they have 1 shelter across the whole county and 2 advocates. So talking to them about let's step back and have a different framework, like they're just doing everything they can to stay alive and serve these families. So we need collaboration across the nation, and I think we need to be able to see things outside of the lens of California sometimes, because we are better resourced often than the rest of the nation. And so if we are talking about creating that total shift, we need to be able to see all of that and collaborate together. And you need all the different perspectives, like the research that we're doing with Georgetown on the retreat model. It can be really easy for me to just get on that bandwagon and tell you that's going to solve everything. But it's not. It's one piece in a very, very big and complex puzzle. The retreat model is, I think, one of the very best methods to help people reboot their central nervous system after a trauma, that then will help them be able to be in the complex trauma program that Leslie has been working so well to design, to be able to receive that information differently because their central nervous system will be calmer. And then they need systems like what Liza has going on and what you're learning here at USC to do as well. So I just think that we need to think about all of that together. And I think that as a nation, we are working to create some of those systems of change, but what people have gotten used to being able to do is say, like, so when I started 20 years ago, nobody talked about trauma-informed care. These are new concepts. And now we've gotten good at saying we know we need to do trauma-informed care, but if you ask people what it is, most people are really kind of uncertain on how to define that. And then we've created these systems in different cities, but they're not all necessarily working together, but there are projects that are working to network and bring those things closer together, which, although I've been blessed to be a part of, I'm not necessarily the leader in. So that's why I kind of would like you to answer the question.
So let me just make a quick comment. There's a federal funding, I don't even know what to call it, SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services, right? So SAMHSA recently has published a document about what trauma-informed care is. It's like several hundred pages long. It's ridiculous. I don't know who reads it. But anyway, that was their attempt to try and take a stab at it. How many of you have heard of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network? Anybody in the room? A few of you. Awesome. Okay. So the National Child Traumatic Stress Network is a collaborative group that was developed as a result of a congressional initiative in 2001 to improve the quality of care and access to services for children and family exposed to trauma, any kind of trauma. Children's Institute has had the privilege of being part of this group since the beginning in 2001, and I've been the project director for that collaborative for about a decade. I'm also on the steering committee of NCTSN, and I do work kind of across the country looking at trauma-informed practice. But what I would like to say to all of you, since I have probably 10 seconds left to speak, is please go on the NCTSN website. If you just type in NCTSN, it'll pop up, National Child Traumatic Stress Network, because there are tons of free resources, fact sheets on domestic violence, toolkits, all kinds of things. It's all free. You can download it because these were all generated by federally funded dollars. The exciting thing about NCTSN is that this was a collaborative grant project. There's over 150 sites in the network, and we get funded to collaborate. So when we apply for these grants, we have to talk about all the many collaborations that we are doing and working together. So we're bringing together universities, shelters, community mental health, child welfare, all to work together on these problems, and have made just huge progress in addressing some of these things, bringing people together, breaking down those barriers. So I don't know that I have time to really get into that, but those are some places where you can go and really learn more about this idea of what trauma-informed work is about.
Thank you so much. I'm feeling badly that we don't have more time for question and answers, but I think part of why we did this summit was to make this moment count, but also keep the conversation going. So we will post the PowerPoint slide presentations from the panelists on our website, as well as some of the links that Leslie mentioned, especially for those of you that are studying in this this field to know what's out there. And I really think we need to make a commitment here today to really integrating and living this approach, because I really do feel like this is the future for providing domestic violence services. And we work really hard at Good Shepherd to do that, but it takes a lot of time and energy, and I'm reminded of all the things that we need to keep doing. So with that, I would like to thank the panelists for your participation. And I'd like to introduce Kathleen Buczko, who's our Director of Fund Development, to introduce our next panel. Thank you.
You may have noticed in the past few months some renewed interest in the general media about domestic violence and the ability of our community to respond to seeing domestic violence on a national media stage. So with Ray Rice and the NFL, and the NFL's response to the violence that they witnessed in an Atlantic City casino, the conversation was definitely elevated. So today on our panel we have Dr. Carolann Peterson, some of you who are students familiar with her work and her reference point on this issue. She's joined by Areva Martin, who is a CNN commentator as well as a partner at Martin & Martin law firm and an advocate. And Victor Rivas, who is a former NFL player and a spokesperson and a survivor of domestic violence. I'm going to kick it off. Full disclosure, I spent 10 years at NBC as a reporter, so we joked that this is Meet the Press, but not really. We'll leave that to our esteemed colleagues who do that type of thing. But Carolann, USC was included in the national conversation a couple of weeks ago with a football player who was arrested here on campus for domestic violence. Talk about the community response here and how that can be impacted just by the voices here in the room as well as the community as a whole, that type of response.
One of the things I have to say that I was very proud that USC did is that our campus security immediately alerted LAPD and arrest was made. You don't see that often on college campuses, and I have to say we haven't always sometimes stepped up. But in this case, they really stepped up. There was an arrest made, and he was in jail on a $50,000 bail. But one of the things that we have to look at is what is our policies. And across the country, college campuses haven't really had a policy on domestic violence, sexual assault, and a number of issues such as even sexual harassment. I have to tell you, I found out recently, which made me feel very proud, but I still have more research to do on this, that our football team, as long as you are on the team, receive training on domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, 3 times a year. So as long as you are on the football team from, say, freshman all the way through your senior year, you're getting 12 trainings on this. And I was very pleased to see that. But what I want to know is a couple of things. First off, how long have we been doing this? And who's doing the training and how long is the training? But the fact that there's an effort being put forth is something we don't see too often from college campuses. Generally, the response on domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault is to handle it internally. Because if you're the star quarterback, you're our moneymaker, and we can't afford to have our name in the newspaper. I think we need to change the dialogue. That changes with my students in my class. That changes with students in any other class on a college campus. But I also want to challenge the media to not take such a passive voice that we've always had in the past, such as, a football player abuses wife, the victim becomes secondary. I'd like to see the news media put the victim first and not have the dialogue of why did she stay, but why did he bat her? So that we start to change the dialogue, and as we've been hearing all morning, this collaboration, so that we get to collaborate with the media and put out more and better information about why this happens, the resources that are available, and that the news media becomes a partner with domestic violence shelters and domestic violence agencies, child abuse agencies, so that we can start to really put the media and college campuses and all of us out there to make sure that this focus becomes stopping the violence and not looking at perpetuating it.
Carolann, it seems like you've thrown the gauntlet, so those of us from a media perspective. Riva, do you have a comment about the role of media and how that we can better educate the community about domestic violence?
Yes, I do. I want to make a couple of points in response to what the professor said. You know, I was shocked to learn that people didn't really understand what was happening on college campuses as it relates to sexual violence and sexual assault. And I have people ask me all the time, well, you know, how come the universities are handling the situation at all? And people didn't realize that a crime, a sexual crime that happens on a college campus is nonetheless a crime. And that the police should be called immediately, and that these cases should be referred to the district attorney, no differently than if this happened if you were walking down the street. But a lot of people are under the false impression that somehow because it happens on a college campus, that it becomes the sole purview of the college to handle. So I think that's an important message that we communicate, those of us who are actively advocating, you know, ending violence against women, is that we make sure that victims know that it doesn't matter that you've been battered or abused by someone on a college campus. It is a crime. And although the university may be alerted and notified, they should not be the agency that's handling a criminal matter. They're not equipped to do so. They don't have the skills. They don't have the resources. And they're not the body that is empowered in our state to prosecute crimes. So although they may have their own internal process and mechanism to determine if that student will be disciplined, expelled from that campus, they are not mutually exclusive. So I think that's an important role, and I've been beating that drum on the media that, you know, this talk about college campuses, we need to make sure that women understand if you've been violated, call the police. Call the police first. Now the campus may decide to get involved, they may have their own, you know, system for dealing with it, but you have the right, and your matter should be handled in the way that any other criminal matter should be handled. So I think that's an important message for the media. And also this message about changing the dialogue. I think it's very important. So after the Ray Rice, you know, we all watched the video, and you know, there are lots of shows and lots of commentary about it. There was a group of women, and they were the wives of ex-football players, and one happens to be a colleague and a friend of mine, and they wanted to go on national television and answer the question about why women stay. And they were upset. They were upset about the way the media portrayed Janae Rice, and they wanted the world to know about their families, about the difficult nature of, you know, being in a relationship where they've been battered, about the considerations that they have to make as women. And that message, you're correct, doesn't get talked about a great deal. And I'm also a children's rights advocate, so I think that it's important that we talk about the children who are a part of these relationships, and the women having to make decisions not just about ending the relationship, but separating a family, and all of the decision making that goes around that, which often isn't talked about. And a lot of these players, let's face it, there's a racial component in this as well. A lot of these players are African American. They come from very poor backgrounds. So think about the woman who now is dating the star player who's been playing football since 4 years old, and their biggest dream in life has come true. They have an NFL contract. They have millions of dollars. They bought, you know, they're planning to buy their mother a home and take care of their entire family. And now you're the girlfriend that has benefited, or the wife that's benefited from their career, and you have to step forward and now reveal to the world that he's been battering you. So think of the pressure that girl, woman, has from the family of this star, you know, who stands to lose not just the status, but the money and the lifestyle. So I submit to you as social workers, you know, how do you empower a woman in that situation? Because I can't imagine the pressure. You're already battered, you're already low self-esteem and all that comes along with being the victim of domestic violence, but you have this added pressure of you're not just putting in jail the postal worker or the stalker at Ralph's. This might be, you know, the world's greatest running back with a $50 million contract and endorsements, etc. So how do you empower that woman to come forward and not just speak about the violence, but perhaps in a career of someone who's, you know, heralded as the best, you know, and the brightest amongst
I think that's an important point. Victor,
you may know the answer to that.
And survivor of domestic violence, you're in a unique position to discuss both sides.
Well, before I begin, I have to clarify something if you don't already know. I'm not a woman. And you know, it's interesting because I've been speaking out on this issue for 15 years. I'm the national spokesperson with the National Network to End Domestic Violence. Primarily, I've been an actor for the last 30 years, and usually playing bad guys. But my Hollywood agent asked me when I became the spokesperson, he said, you know, how'd you get that gig? And I told him I lived it. So just a little bit of background, I grew up in a home where domestic violence and child abuse took place on a level of torture. I saw really horrific things being done to my mother. As a child, I was beaten, I was tied up, I was locked in closets, I was hammered, I was burned, and a few of the things that my father did. Now, you got to remember, this was over 40 years ago. I didn't know this, but we were living in Hawthorne, California, and there were no hotlines or shelters for my mom to turn to. But there was the good shelter, and we didn't know about it. And so this was at a different time, so we've come a long way on this issue. And if I can tell you the good news, when I first started speaking out on this issue, it was usually me and a room full of women. And but I got to tell you that there is a growing number of male groups across the country. My son is involved with Harvard Men Against Rape. There's Men Against Violence. There's Call to Men. There's boys coaching boys to men. There's a lot of men that are standing up. But here's the problem. When we talk about football players, and I played at Florida State University, which of course is really in the news right now. And I'm kind of disappointed on how they've handled several of the issues. So, you know, when we talk about, you know, we see with these athletes, it's usually about 1 or 2 athletes on a team that are committing these acts of violence and disrespect towards women. It's usually domestic violence or sexual assault. Then we see these same 2 athletes return, usually after a slap on the wrist to a hero's welcome. Well, not only is that an injustice to the society, but it's an injustice to the other 48 guys on the team who are good fathers, husbands, and they give their free time to charitable causes. But here's the problem. Those other 48 guys aren't standing up. So they're being complicit. And so when you think of football players, generally in society you think of us as these big animals that can take what we want, including sex, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. And when they say, well, you know, they're trained to be violent and they, you know, they can't turn it off when they come off the field, again, that's the majority of us know how to turn it off. But you know, until we start to really address this issue, and when I say address this issue, I'm talking about redefining manhood for our young boys and young men. And so we need to start at a very young age. When we were talking with, you know, we had a lot of the child advocates up here, and that's where we're really going to make a difference, and where we can really turn this around. I will say that the NFL, because of pressure, and where did the pressure really come from? The sponsors, the money. And when the money started speaking, that's when Ray Rice got kicked off for the rest of the year. I wrote an op-ed piece called "Behind Elevator Doors" that was made it on Huffington Post and several other newspapers. I didn't need to see what happened behind those elevator doors. I knew what happened inside by the way he treated her outside the elevator door. You know, but the reality is that we as a society needed to see something that visceral inside the elevator to kick us into action.
Okay, but what haven't you seen sponsors at this point go quiet, right? Ray Rice is being, you know, is here next week as
well, but that's part of the Players Association. They're going to fight for him. The sponsors are on it, and I can tell you that in my time and being involved in this issue, there are corporations right and left that realize that this issue is impacting all of us, and it's impacting us on all levels. The biggest reason a woman goes to the emergency, domestic violence, the healthcare cost, security at workplaces. It's the biggest issue. So there's Verizon, there's Allstate, there's all those companies. But when you get Anheuser-Busch to say, clean up your act, do something about this, you know, so we're moving in the right direction. The NFL has hired 4 of some of the leading advocates in this field for many, many years. Rita Smith being one of them. One of them was a friend of mine. And so we're moving in the right direction. But it's really, it's upon us, you know, men, to be a new solution to no problem.
But the women hired are to set a policy so that every NFL team treats an abuser consistently. The women hired are not hired to try and prevent domestic violence among their players. And what about the 72 other players, not Rice, not Peterson, who are convicted or accused or awaiting trial for domestic violence? What about
I think that's why it's important to have these types of forums, right? I think it's important, like the collaborations that we heard earlier today, and I think that what both Areva and Victor have pointed out is that domestic violence is an issue of children. And beginning to correct the generational violence that these men, these players who become so integral to their family as the ones who are providing the houses and the additional opportunities for their families to grow, is addressing that at a much more seminal level. But
yeah, to your point, I think Victor is very optimistic about the moves that the NFL has made. Some of us are not so optimistic and are concerned. And are concerned that what happened was this big media fiasco and this kind of song and dance around doing something. And the appointment of women, yes, I think we have to acknowledge was a good first step. But we have to see, you know, what happens with those policies as you've identified, because we often know that we like to put Band-Aids on problems in this country, and we can appoint women, but one, what power do they have? Because we don't have women, you know, the NFL, if we look at, is still, you know, incredibly male-dominated, so we're not talking about female owners. So if you're hired, you're still having to respond to the leadership of your boss, the owners of the team. So I think without continued pressure on the sponsors and on the NFL, we could, you know, very well be looking at this next year and not very much has changed, and you're right. Ray Rice, because of the Players Association and their collective bargaining agreement, probably is going to be reinstated, and that's, you know, something in terms of his legal rights. But I'm not so certain that we're going to see dramatic changes without continued advocacy, national media attention, and pressure. So we can't stop at just the appointment of those 4 women. I was happy about it, you know, maybe not so. Let's see what they do and what power they are given by the owners, who are all male.
I actually want to take our dialogue a little bit in a different direction, and that is, I think what we have to also talk about is young players who are coming up, making $60 million a year and not knowing what to do. I think we need to start when they're in high school being that star player and giving them mentors. So as they begin to progress, they've got somebody to look up to and talk to. I think they need financial advisors. I think when you're 21, 22, 23, and you're making $60 million that you've never seen in your lifetime, it becomes overwhelming. Things come easily to you, and you forget that they can easily be taken away when an incident like this happens. And so I think we need to give them direction and guidance in how to make it better, that it could easily be gone tomorrow, because even if it's not a domestic violence incident, it's an injury. And that $60 million is gone, and what are you going to do? I think we need to start, Victor touched on it, we need to start when they're 5 years old and do age-appropriate conflict resolution. As my students know, I tell the story basically of, you know, how does a 5-year-old little boy tell a little girl he likes her? He shoves her, he pulls her hair. At 5, we think it's cute. It's not so cute at 16. And when they're 16, the message is, wait, why is it not okay now? So we need to start these dialogues when they're very young and progress this all the way up through their football career, through any career, whether they are the postal worker. And at the same time, go back to what we were talking about, of collaboration with news media, with former football players, with sponsors. You're right, I think we need to write those letters to Anheuser-Busch and others to keep the pressure going. But we also need to applaud those players who are role models, like Victor, like Joe Torre, like Russell Owens, who's starting the peace campaign. If we don't talk about the role models, they get lost. And we need to remember they're out there and show them to our young men, no matter if they're the star player or if they're the person sitting on the bench. Those role models become really important.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I am super cautiously optimistic. So, I don't want to give the wrong impression. We've got a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do. But again, I really think it's really about redefining manhood. And I can tell you from my generation, here were some of the here's 3 of the myths about what it took to be a man, coming from my generation. How much money you made, how athletic you were, and how many women you could go to bed with. And that was manhood. So we have a lot of work to do. And our boys are they're getting, what I would say from my son's generation as a whole, not completely, but they've got a lot of things going in their favor. Most kids growing up in this generation are colorblind. They're not homophobic. So now we need to just redirect them again. And especially, and I got to tell you that right after the Chris Brown assault on Rihanna, I spoke at an inner city high school. And when I was done speaking, we had a Q&A period like this, and one of the gals got up in the audience and said, yeah, but Rihanna must have done something. And I said, how many girls in this audience think that Rihanna was somewhat responsible for the violent assault that happened to her? And I got to tell you, about 50% of the girls in the audience raised their hand. So we need to send a different message to our young girls too. But we have a responsibility as men, and I agree that the media should be covering the good guys. And there are a lot of them out there. There are more good men than the bad guys. And we need to start covering them and start showing our young boys different role models, and not just show us the train wrecks every time. So again, there's a lot of work we have to do. We're inched into the right direction, but I want to be clear on that. It's like I'm not going, oh hallelujah, we've made it. We have not. We've got a lot of work to do.
Well, I think that's an interesting response, because I think there is a lot of work to do. I think that the challenge becomes, news likes a train wreck. Sponsors don't mind being on a highly rated show like TMZ when they're showing a train wreck. And so how can we use the diversity of media, the internet, the online real-time news that we have to tell stories in a non-traditional way, to incentivize the traditional media to be more successful around telling those good stories. Today is a great example.
I think you're so right. Big shows are going to always show the train wrecks because they get the ratings, right. And that's just the reality. And as much as folks like me want to talk about all those great role models, nobody cares. They keep, they channel flip when you're telling a really nice, heartwarming story. But you put someone up that has, 8 kids by 8 different women, and they, beat the kid to the point of blood. That's going to be on the news for a lot of days. But you raise an excellent point. In today's society, there's so many different forms of media. So they're not just 3 or 4 networks. There are 100 million different channel cables. There's social media. There internet sites, so people can take to those outlets for free and write op-ed pieces like Victor did, and I wrote a piece on HuffPost about the NFL. use the power of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those ways that younger people are connecting anyhow and getting their news to send those messages and tell those positive stories. So we also have to work with girls to cause them to appreciate the qualities of different kinds of guys, and that those bad boys are bad for a reason. They're train wrecks for a reason. If you attach yourself to them, you're going to be a part of that train wreck. And good guys come in a lot of different packages. So that is also, that parallel message that we want young girls to get. And that feeling good about yourself and being, successful in this world doesn't mean attaching yourself to someone who plays football just for the sake of, just because they play football. Now, if you love them and they play football, great. But, you talk about what guys were taught. So girls were sent off to college, to find Mr. Right. Mr. Right had to have a big checkbook and, drive a fancy car and be able to provide for you. Now, more enlightened women, we realize we can have our own careers, make our own money, but that is a message that we constantly have to convey to young girls. Your self-worth is not defined by your partner, your spouse, and particularly if that person is abusive. That is not how you want to define yourself.
I would just, and it's a little bit off that topic, but I would say, we have a room of people here, and each one of you can go out and affect someone. The biggest thing that I find is in speaking on this issue, and when we talk about this issue, one of the films I did as an actor, I spent 4 weeks in San Quentin prison, in the prison population. We were not protected or guarded. It's a film called Blood In, Blood Out. And every single guy that I talked to in San Quentin had family violence in his background. So, I walked around that prison in character, and I went, there but for the grace of God go I. So, the reality is that I was not born bad or violent. That violence was taught to me. But if we're really going to make an impact as a society, what we need to do for those that don't understand this issue, those in this room do, because you're either going in to do the work, or you've been doing the work for many, many years, or you've lived it. And until we connect the dots for the entire society, instead of saying, why does a woman stay? The bigger question we should ask is, why does society allow abuse? And until we connect those dots for people and make them understand that this issue is costing our country anywhere from $335 billion to $735 billion a year. And they say, well, we don't have money for these programs. We don't have money for the shelter that's providing unbelievable assistance and redirection for these families and these children like me. What we should be doing is telling them, this is where your money is better invested, and this is how we can connect the dots with people, is, show them how it impacts all of us. That kid that's bullied at home, that comes to school and becomes a bully, there's a reason for that, usually. And then there's the kid who's being bullied, shows up at school with a gun, as we've seen way too often in this country. We saw it again last week. I don't know if that kid was being bullied, but it's a cycle. And this is how, if we can connect the dots on a football field, in our classrooms, in our workplaces, and just for the people that don't understand this issue, to say, hey, it doesn't happen in my house, it's not my issue. It is your issue, because it will impact you, and it will impact your community. I think that's when we can really start to make a little bit of a dent and get going in the right direction. Again, I'm so grateful that women like my mother have a place to go, and that's great. But the bad news on this issue is it's as prevalent today as it was in my childhood. So we really need to do something about that.
One of the things we also have to look at, and especially for my generation, is that we forget social media has an impact. Look at what happened after the Ray Rice incident, of all the tweeting of why did I stay, which was just an absolute phenomenal response. As my students will tell you, I'm not always very technologically oriented, but they are. And we need to capitalize on that and get the message out in that way. One of the things I initially got criticized for is I was one of the few faculty who stepped up to do texting, and some of my colleagues said, "You're texting?" I said, "My students text." If I don't know what my students are doing in the next generation of media and social media and, technology, we miss an opportunity to make that next generation carry on the work. And that's part of where this needs to go. As much as I don't plan on retiring anytime soon, it's still a fact at some point, I'm not doing this work, they are. We need to give them the tools and the ability to help the next generation and all of those kids that were in Victor's spot at this point in time to connect with them. And connecting sometimes means a lot of the technology work that sometimes we are afraid of, we don't understand. Some of that also being in terms of technology, cyberbullying. We forget a lot of the harassment that happens these days happens on the internet. And so we need to make sure we step out of our comfort zone and look at what happens down the road, because we're going to miss kids of the future because we're not taking those steps.
We're going to take a selfie.
I'm going to say we've been live tweeting this event.
We're going to tweet ourselves.
We've been live tweeting this event all morning. And I think that, you know, we've crossed the line from redefining gender roles to how our sports system is set up and the role that media is playing. We've got a little bit of time if there are any questions from the audience.
I have just one comment, and I look around, I see mostly women in this room. And it seems to me that this issue should be addressed to the males primarily.
I think what Victor said to start his talk is very indicative. At least he's not the only man in the room.
I wanted just to add to that, because I have to tell you, I've spoken on this issue for, again, 15 years. I have an athletic background, obviously. This year was the first year that I've actually spoken to a college athletic program. I've never spoken to a professional program. I've never spoken to, you know, my own college. I spoke at the School of Family Violence at Florida State University.
So they invited you to come and speak to the...
I spoke at Old Dominion University this year to all athletes, male and female. But because we always want to take care of things in house, and so I think that I would hope that that's going to change, because we keep seeing it in the media, and again, like we talked earlier, there's a little bit of optimism, but if we don't keep our voices on high, it's going to get buried until the next incident.
Jumps right off to the next.
Right. So it's really up to us to say no, that's unacceptable, and that includes my own university, which I've got some real issues on how several different circumstances have been handled, and there were sexual assaults or domestic violence, and those players are still playing. They're remarkable players. So what? So what? It's like. But I think that we really, again, we have to just keep talking about this. And there are men in this room, but again, until this room is half full of men, and they're also seeking answers and wanting to be a part of the solution, then we're not going to close that gap. So again, we're moving in the right direction. We're nowhere near what we need to be.
I guess this is more for Riva, but how do we get domestic violence advocates in the conversation? It seems like we're talking about domestic violence, but the people that are on the ground making the difference are not out there to say, like, we are making change and there are ways to make a difference in this issue.
So when you say they're not in the room, do you mean conversations like this, or where are you finding that you're not able to get their attention?
I think ESPN has been trying to talk about domestic violence. We've had some not so great comments, and we've had some great comments from commentators and things like that, but we don't really have a public voice as the advocates.
Can I follow up with her? Well, not to comment, but to just add to it. I think what you're saying is the fact of why is it we're not the ones who get the phone call from CNN, ESPN, and those, and it's always somebody else, and we're going, but you're not in the people.
Really good question. And a lot of that just has to do with how media works, and people who have platforms and relationships with media. So when these stories break, the producers are running around trying to figure out, who to grab to talk about the issue. And some stations go to their go-to people that are just, on the grounds. They're the reporters and experts, commentators who talk about a whole range of issues. I do think, though, in the domestic violence context, when the Ray Rice story broke, I did see new faces. I saw some heads of domestic violence organizations. But I don't think we can rely solely on traditional media, because traditional media is like a whole different animal. They're driven by ratings, they're driven by sponsors, and if you're not, TV friendly, if you don't have a big platform, you're not going to get on TV on a big story. It's just not going to happen. But there's so many other ways that you can have a voice. Domestic violence advocates can have a voice in this, conversation through, like we talked about, the social media context. The women who started that, why do women stay? So they trended that hashtag, why do women stay? And then it started to get picked up by traditional media like USA Today, started covering stories on it. So someone who doesn't have a big platform can have one overnight by starting an important dialogue and conversation through non-traditional media, and then, the big boys, as they, you think of them, will take note, get their attention, and then all of a sudden you start to see that person in the mainstream media. So I teach people all the time, don't worry about, CNN or NBC calling you. Do what you can do, and we've proven, people have proven that just by using their phones, using the technology that they have access to, you can have a tremendous impact. So I just encourage those domestic violence advocates to use their voice, whether it's posting on, HuffPost, or writing an article in your local school newspaper or online. There are lots of outlets that are out there, and sometimes people, I think, get caught up in, who's listening versus just getting that message out there. You'd be surprised how many people you can actually connect with.
And with that, we are coming to the end of our first summit on domestic violence with the USC School of Social Work. We want to thank you from Good Shepherd Shelter for making this moment count. And the charter for everyone in the audience is to go out and continue the conversation. As Areva has so eloquently told us, everyone has a platform, everyone has a voice. It's important to use it and keep this conversation going. Thank you so much for coming.